All right, just check. That's what happens when I change the low beam. Now, I did this a few days ago now, and what I finally did is I took the dust cap off the high beam on the left side and switched it to the low beam, because you need your low beams, because those have to be on. So what happens with the high beam is when you take that cap off, you don't use the high beam that much, but it shows a little diffusion on the high beam. Now the low beam, it's fine now because I put that cap on it. But that hurt, man. The cat did that. The car didn't do that. That was the cat. And that was the cat too, right there. He bit me right after our rehearsal. Linda and I did the Cole and Linda Filmmakerband rehearsal. And then we did a song called The Rainbow Bridge, which is about these cats that died and went to the Rainbow Bridge. Let's see if he's over there. Yeah, he's over there. And he got offended. And there he is. He's sleeping right there. Let's see if I can see him right here. There he goes. He's moving around a little bit. He got offended. He got mad because we were singing about dead cats on a rainbow bridge. The song's called Rainbow. We sang it tonight in a rehearsal. We don't have all the lyrics yet, but we sang it. We got most of the lyrics. I'm cutting all my songs down to smaller lyrics. It's getting too Sun Kill Moons, Mark Zolik kind of thing. But she named a lot of her cats in it. And I guess you call it the bridge or the chorus, whatever you want to call it. And then this happened because of my car. And I mean, man. I was able to change it though. I was able to change the low beam and get the dust cap on it. I used to use the dust cap from the high beam and then screwed it on the back of it tonight. It looks a little bit better. I'm gonna have to get the dealership to go in and readjust the bulb a little bit, because bulb goes in and then it turns. So you just put it in, it turns, it makes a clicking noise. But when I'm turning it, the wire, you can see the wire. An old man at AutoZone did it, but I don't know if he did it that way or if he was supposed to do it that way. So I'm gonna just have the dealership go and look at it. They'll readjust the bulb, and then they'll put the cap back on, and then I'm gonna have to either reorder a low beam cap, or what I'm gonna have to do is, what I'll do eventually is, I'm gonna have them look on an oil change. When I do an oil change, I'm gonna have them look underneath the car where the catch-all is. I'm just talking about like the little plastic bottom part of the car. It's like thick bottom part. And look in there and see if they can find that low beam cap. And then I'll just switch them back from the high beam back cap to the low beam. It looks fine. It doesn't look that bad. It's just the way the bulb is. It's just kind of like, it's probably like turned in there like about that much rather than the full amount. When I look at it, it looks decent, so it's not that big of a deal. It's not like I'm shooting any kind of Lost Highway movie, David Lynch style. Another thing too is David Lynch, his music is better than most bands out there today. That's what I should have. What I'm really probably going to do is when I go back and make another list, I'm probably going to conclude Thought Gang, because David Lynch has a band called Thought Gang. He's better than I'd probably say about 90% of all the pop bands, and all the other bands out there are really boring. You know, the song Pinky is great, and he's got like tons of good music. He's better than most rock bands. He's right up there with Nirvana and all of them. Smashing Pumpkins. Most people realize he's a rock star. I mean, Lynch is a rock star. But I don't know if he's performed live. And he does weird things with the guitar. But anyway, I may include him later on. Good night. Right, the days mixed up. next little segment here is going to talk about why Martin Scorsese was not excommunicated by the Catholic Church, and I'll tell you why, and why Fellini was. Okay. All right, so the reason why Martin Scorsese was not excommunicated by the Catholic Church and Fellini, the great filmmaker Fellini, was excommunicated was basically very easy. Scorsese didn't downplay or degrade Mother Mary, as they say, the mother of Jesus Christ. And the Catholic Church puts high regards to Mother Mary. So they would have excommunicated him over Last Temptation of Christ, but in actuality, because it was respectful to Mother Mary, they used Last Temptation of Christ as like Sunday school material. I've really heard this stuff. I've heard a priest had used it to teach to. It was like almost evangelical for the Catholic Church. They don't use the term evangelical. Now, Protestants protested against the movie. So the Protestants, it's very almost like, think of Gangs of New York nearly. You know, where Daniel Day-Lewis is lined up. Liam Neeson has the Catholic cross, the Irish. You know, he's representing the Irish, and Daniel Day-Lewis was representing the Protestant. That's what's crazy. That's how I never really realized it. I went to New York and everything, but I never really realized it then until I got back from New York that I watched Gangs of New York. I couldn't really figure out things. It took me a while to figure out Scorsese's work. That actually, to be honest, in layman terms, he would have been kind of like my enemy, even though he's my hero. You know, Scorsese was a big hero of mine. But it wouldn't have been that way back in the day, because he's more on the side of the Catholic Church. But I don't see him as an enemy. That's what's interesting. And he may not be that way. You know, there's a thing called the Reformed, the Catholic Reformed, and they're more kind of like Protestants. So it's kind of getting to be the same. The Catholic and the Protestants are starting to shake hands and understand one another a little bit more. We don't have confession, though. But Fellini was excommunicated from the Catholic Church because he did a whole little movie. It was a movie about Mary, and they saw it as disrespectful, and they kicked him out. So no disrespect to Mother Mary, and not even the Protestants should be. We should still be respectful to the Catholic, because I learned that from playing or almost playing Martin Luther. I almost did. I was cast as Martin Luther not very long ago, so I had to do tons of research about the Catholic and about where it all came from, the Roman Catholic Church and everything. So there is a respect between the two of them. But yeah, Scorsese's not excommunicated. They see him as, you know, he wanted to be a priest, and they still, you know. The thing is about violence, and I'm going to talk about violence in a minute, is there's a book that's very violent. It's called the Bible. The Bible is a very, very violent book, and the New Testament too. But it's not based in violence, but it does have violence in it. And we'll talk about that.
TCU. No pressure this time coming from the Frogs on the back half of the floor. Locking it up, now cracks midcourt at the logo. Slings it left side.
All right, so we're talking about violence. Okay, so the Bible, let me plug this in real quick. Okay, so the Bible does have some stories in it. It has war stories where people are beheaded. You know, this is the Old Testament where people are just, you know, lots of violence in the Old Testament. And then the New Testament is centered around the crucifixion, which is it's not a pleasant thing. The crucifixion is not, it's not supposed to be like, oh, well, you know, no. Jesus suffered immensely on the cross. There was much pain. And he showed all that in his movie. He didn't show that the movie led up to the crucifixion. And, you know, whether the writer was correct about
his thoughts. We don't know because we don't have the mind of God, and sometimes the writer thinks that. But it was protested against the Protestant church. They protest. So, you know. But there is pain and suffering, and there's also extreme violence, and it does happen. So the Bible does not ignore it. The Word of God does not ignore the truth about things. So it's something that's part of carrying the cross of Jesus, you know. So there's an evangelical aspect of all of this, whether you like it or not. And whether you try to hide or you try to be the most, come off as the most evil, dark, I don't want to say goth, because I don't see goth as completely evil, you know, because if you look at the Gothic towers of the time of goth, they had spires that all pointed to heaven and pointed to God. See a goth person walking around wearing all dark stuff, there is a sense of evangelical there, and that's why people don't understand it. Look at the Puritans, they wore all black.
Approaching a railroad crossing.
I know about the railroad crossing. So what I'm trying to say is that the Bible does not ignore violence. So why should cinema? And that's probably an argument. But of course, in Protestant, you know, you got Alex Kendrick, all those people, they approach cinema in a very different way, and I respect what they do. I'm an Alex Kendrick fan. I like Courageous. I like, you know, I'm a big fan of Flywheel. I actually rewrote Flywheel and tried to pitch it to some of the leaders of my church, and they actually got a little snippety with me. They did not give me funding for it, but it was called Sparkplug. Whereas actually it was called Angel liked the idea of Sparkplug, and then I think I called it Flex Plate and a Sparkplug is what I called it. I really did this. It was a word for word rendition of I changed the names, and it was a word for word rendition of Alex Kendrick's movie Flywheel. And the thing about Alex Kendrick, and he'll stick to his guns, and he does many speeches to different churches and goes around. He's evangelical, and he'll stick to his guns. Like he'll stick to what he believes in. And I've seen a lot of his vlogs and stuff like that, social media and things. And I've studied him, and I've talked to other writers that have sent, other screenwriters that have sent information to Alex Kendrick. And he's very strict. He doesn't just go around throwing around money and funding these big movies and things like that. So it's purely evangelical with Alex Kendrick. But the idea behind what I was wanting to do was I was wanting the community, or at least the church, to kind of look at things, at least poverty, because he talks about poverty in Flywheel in a different way. And my church was very wealthy. I'm not saying they were the most wealthy church, because there's far more wealthier churches that I could have gone to. But my church was on the upper end of wealth. And anyway, they're having some type of free puppies. They've been giving around these puppies for quite a bit of time. But what I mean by a rich church is that Flywheel is an important script, and I respect it. It's a good script. And Kendrick, even though he did a cop film, he did Courageous, it's a good film. It's a good film, and the acting's good. It hits upon really important things, but it's not Departed, you know. It doesn't have that level of violence. And the realism is there, though. There's some real moments in the beginning. I respect all his movies. I'm not like one to blow it off. Some people call it kind of Disney, you know, they kind of call it lighthearted. But, you know, there's that aspect of cinema. So you can have an aspect where you respect the female body. You know, you don't go for nudity. You may respect violence, so you don't show the violence, but you may hint to it or whatever. And Courageous is a great one. I recommend it. It does hint to it. Although I'm not the biggest fan, obviously if you will follow the channel, I'm not the biggest fan of law enforcement per se, but I'm connected to it in a family way. But it's only because we should be that way, because we have to watch out. We do not want to live under a dictatorship, and we won't. Americans won't. They won't. They'll never live under a dictatorship, even though people are scared of it right now. And we saw what happened in January 6th. But when I'm not dissing anyone's occupation. I don't want to say, okay, your occupation's wrong. A lot of times I've used the term turn in your badge and your sidearm, or lethal sidearm, and it's more of a kind of metaphorical way of maybe talking, maybe poetical or something maybe. But what it means is that everyone has that attitude, and we're really not to judge others. But if you're not a radical, a lot of times you don't even get heard. You know, doesn't mean you have to be a radical. And I learned that from listening to an interview of Billy Corgan talking about that he felt that he was a radical. And then I picked up one of his CDs and looked on the back, and he dedicated it to Jesus Christ. The whole CD that he did, Zeitgeist, was dedicated to Jesus Christ. So there's a kind of an evangelical side to some of the stuff, but not all of it. He was just being honest. So I guess ultimately what I'm saying is we know that there's violence. We know that there's stuff that goes down at Walmart, or there's stuff that goes down at schools and colleges, extremely bad stuff. And there is a moment where we do need defense, and sometimes it has to be organized. Unfortunately, that can get out of hand too. We just saw that with, I think it was 5 cops that are facing maybe prison time. And that's a horrible, what went on was horrible. It's like almost Rodney King style stuff. But it all happened on one side of the one side of the nation, on one, meaning it happened to a certain type of people. I'm not going to call out any names. And that's very strange to see. Very strange to see. It's going to change the face of how we're looking at all of this, how we're looking at all this racism, and I guess you have to call it law enforcement and order and things like that. Now, a friend of mine, his whole dream in life was just to be a cop. There's a documentary I need to go back and watch called A Thin Blue Line, I think. There's another one, of course, there's a movie about military called A Thin Red Line, which was Terrence Malick. But there's another one called A Thin Blue Line. It's a documentary. I don't think I've seen it, so I need to educate myself on that and then watch it. But cop dramas are very popular, and we have to be wary. You know, there are 2 good ones that I think kind of show some stuff, but, you know, as warnings, you know, because we have warnings. Actually, there's 3 of them. One of them is very, very rough. That's Bad Lieutenant. I don't want to get into that. I'm not going to say if it's a Nicolas Cage or the Harvey Keitel. I'm not going to say that. But that one's a rough one. Okay. There's also another one called Training Day, which I think his name is Fuqua or something like that. And I don't know how you pronounce his name, but anyway, he did Training Day. And I believe he also did a really good one called Brooklyn's Finest with Ethan Hawke, probably one of Ethan Hawke's great performances. But it shows, you know, that there's reality to that aspect of it. And no one needs to have their heads in the cloud thinking that they're higher than the Almighty, you know. And this goes back all the way to biblical times, you know. So the Romans were representative of police officers. The Romans were. So, and the violence was condoned, and it was not only condoned, but it was expected by the Romans. So that's why Jesus Christ had to suffer immensely on the cross, was because of how the Romans thought. You know, the Jews didn't really do it. They didn't do that kind of stuff. It happened to them. Jews were crucified all the time. So were the Christians. It was common. It wasn't uncommon to crucify a Jew. Jesus Christ was a Jew. So it wasn't uncommon. It was the way that the Romans expected things to do it. Now, they had to stop doing that. But if you look at the lethal injection thing, it looks like a crucifix. You know, if you ever watch Dead Men Walking. So, you know, we're not much different than the times that we're in. And when you realize that, and you wake up that day, and you realize that we're still in the times of Christ, it's still the year of our Lord, there's a little bit of fear that approaches you. You know, as a performer, or as a writer, or as just a regular person, or just a watcher, you know, person that just views things, observes things. YouTubers are kind of that. They're big fans. YouTubers are big fans of all the big time names of things. And you start to realize that you're in like biblical times, you know, whether you like it or not. And it gets eerie. It's one of the reasons why I think I turned in my membership at my church and walked away, because I physically was hurting. I think I started physically hurting, and stress was becoming too much. And I have read in the Bible there's a time to do that. You know, they call it the wilderness time, things like that. But it does say that can happen. It doesn't mean that I turned away from God, though. Anyway, I got to focus on the road.